The Force was not silent. In the depths of the Theed-powered generator complex, beneath Naboo's gleaming spires and ornate plazas, the living Force surged like a rising tide, urgent, insistent, and sharp with warning. Qui-Gon Jinn felt it before the hum of the energy gates reached its rhythmic crescendo. A tremor passed through him, not of fear, but of clarity. This moment mattered, not as a test of skill, but of choice. The cavernous chamber glowed with alternating walls of crimson energy, their pulses slicing the space into measured intervals. The air smelled of ozone and scorched metal, and beneath it all, the low mechanical thrum echoed like a heartbeat. Across from them stood Darth Maul, horned, tattooed, yellow eyes burning with purpose, his double-bladed lightsaber spinning to life in a hiss of savage promise. Qui-Gon ignited his blade, green light casting sharp shadows across his weathered face. Beside him, Obi-Wan Kenobi followed suit, blue blade steady, stance disciplined. Master and apprentice. 2 Jedi against 1 Sith. Yet as Maul lunged, a vision struck Qui-Gon with the force of revelation. Not images, feelings. Separation. Loss. Fire and silence where a voice should have been. Death. Qui-Gon did not step forward. That single hesitation, less than a breath, changed everything. Maul attacked anyway, a whirlwind of red arcs and lethal momentum, driving them backward toward the energy gates. Obi-Wan met the assault head-on, his Form 3 defense absorbing the barrage, while Qui-Gon circled rather than advanced. He felt the Sith probing, angling, not merely striking to kill, but to divide. This was not a duel. It was a fracture waiting to happen. "Stay with me," Qui-Gon said calmly, his voice cutting through the clash of blades. Obi-Wan glanced at him, surprised, not by the words, but by their weight. Qui-Gon was not instructing. He was anchoring. They moved together. Where Obi-Wan blocked, Qui-Gon countered. Where Qui-Gon pressed, Obi-Wan shielded. Their blades crossed paths with practiced instinct, green and blue weaving into a single rhythm. The Force flowed between them, not as command and obedience, but as shared intent. Maul snarled. The Sith leapt back, boots skidding across the polished floor, eyes narrowing. His advantage, the chaos of isolation, was not forming. The Jedi were not retreating into separate roles. They were adapting. Maul surged forward again, accelerating, spinning his saber staff in a brutal overhead arc meant to break Obi-Wan's guard and force Qui-Gon to overextend. Obi-Wan absorbed the blow, knees bending under the impact, while Qui-Gon struck Maul's flank with surgical precision. The Sith twisted away just in time, sparks scattering as red met green. The energy gates activated. Walls of blazing crimson slammed down between combatants with a deafening crack. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan found themselves together on the same side of the barrier. Maul stood alone on the other. The Sith paced, breathing heavy, eyes never leaving them. His rage simmered, not explosive, but coiled. This was wrong. The Jedi should have been split. One isolated, one hunted. That was how it always went. Qui-Gon exhaled slowly and deactivated his blade. Obi-Wan did the same, though tension coiled through him like a drawn wire. The gates pulsed between them and Maul, bathing the chamber in alternating red light. "This is where he expects it," Qui-Gon said quietly. "Expects what?" Obi-Wan asked, keeping his eyes on Maul. "Fear. Impatience. One of us rushing ahead." Qui-Gon closed his eyes, feeling the Force flow through the chamber, through the machinery, through the lives above them fighting their own battles. The Sith thrive when bonds break. Obi-Wan absorbed that, brow furrowing. The Jedi Order taught detachment, control. Yet here was his master speaking of unity as strength, not restraint. On the other side of the gate, Maul snarled again, pacing faster now, blade ignited, the red glow reflecting off his tattoos. He struck the barrier once, sparks erupting uselessly. Qui-Gon opened his eyes. "We do not give him what he wants," he said. The gates dropped. Maul launched himself forward instantly, a scream of fury ripping from his throat. Obi-Wan met him, blades colliding in a shriek of energy. Qui-Gon did not hang back, nor did he charge ahead. He flowed, moving like water around the clash, redirecting Maul's momentum, forcing the Sith to adjust again and again. Maul's attacks grew sharper, heavier. He drove Obi-Wan toward the edge of the chamber, trying to pin him, to isolate him by sheer force. Kagan stepped in without hesitation, taking a glancing blow across his shoulder that burned through fabric and flesh. Pain flared, but he did not falter. Obi-Wan felt it through the Force. "Master." "I'm fine," Kagan said, already pressing the attack. They pushed Maul back together, forcing him to retreat step by step, disrupting his rhythm. The Sith hissed, frustration bleeding into fury. This was not the duel he had trained for, not the victory promised by his master. High above them, Naboo burned. Fighters screamed through the skies. Gungans clashed with droids under crackling shields. And in the shadows of Coruscant, Darth Sidious paused in his chambers, a faint disturbance brushing the edges of his awareness. Something shifted. Back in the generator complex, Maul overcommit, just for a moment. Kagan saw it. So did Obi-Wan. Their blades moved as one. If you want to see more characters and pivotal moments reimagined in the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Maul barely twisted aside, the strike grazing his arm instead of cleaving through. He leapt back, breathing hard now, eyes blazing with something new. Not confidence. Concern. The duel had only just begun, but the Sith already understood a terrible truth. These two would not break, and that meant the galaxy might not either. Maul attacked again, without waiting for the rhythm of the chamber to settle. He no longer stalked or tested. He assaulted, a storm of red light and feral momentum that smashed into Kagan and Obi-Wan with bone-jarring force. The air vibrated with each collision, lightsabers screaming as if the Force itself recoiled from the violence. Obi-Wan braced, feet sliding across the smooth floor as Maul hammered down with both blades, alternating angles too fast for a single defender to manage alone. Kagan stepped inside the arc, his green blade catching the lower strike, while Obi-Wan deflected the upper. Sparks burst between them, scattering like fireflies. They moved as one body now. Maul felt it. The connection between master and apprentice was no longer subtle. It pressed against him like resistance in the Force, a current that bent probability away from his intent. He snarled and vaulted over them, twisting midair, blades flashing down in a scissoring cut meant to sever Qui-Gon's head from his shoulders. Kagan dropped to one knee, the red blade screaming past his scalp, while Obi-Wan pivoted and slashed upward. Maul landed badly, boots skidding, forced to roll to avoid the counterstrike. For the first time since the duel began, the Sith lost ground. The energy gates cycled again, crimson walls crashing down between them in a deafening cadence. This time, Maul found himself cut off farther down the chamber, alone with nothing but the hum of the generators and his own rage. He paced like a caged predator, yellow eyes flicking between the two Jedi. His breathing was heavier now. Anger bled into the Force around him, sharp and jagged. Kagan deactivated his saber once more. Obi-Wan hesitated, then followed suit, though every instinct screamed against it. His muscles burned, sweat beaded under his robes, and his shoulder throbbed where Maul's blade had clipped him earlier. Yet beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred, clarity. "He's changing," Obi-Wan murmured. "Yes," Kagan said. "He expected us to fight as individuals. He trained for that. He was taught to exploit it." Maul struck the barrier again, this time with both blades, howling in fury. The red energy held. "The Sith do not understand what binds us," Kagan continued. "They mistake unity for weakness, attachment, distraction." Obi-Wan swallowed. The teachings of the Order echoed in his mind, warnings about closeness, about emotional dependence. Yet what he felt now was not fear of loss, but strength and presence. The gates fell. Maul lunged immediately, but the rhythm was off. His strikes were heavier, less precise, fueled by rage rather than calculation. Obi-Wan absorbed the assault, letting Maul's momentum flow past him, while Kagan struck at exposed joints, forcing the Sith to defend instead of dominate. Maul roared and unleashed a violent force push. The shockwave blasted outward, slamming Kagan into a support column and hurling Obi-Wan across the chamber. Metal groaned. Dust rained from the ceiling. For a heartbeat, they were separated. Maul turned toward Obi-Wan, blade already spinning, eyes alight with savage triumph. Obi-Wan rose into the Force instead of retreating. He did not reach for fear. He reached for trust. Maul's blades came down in a crushing overhead strike. Obi-Wan caught it, knees buckling, but he held. The Force surged through him, not as raw power, but as balance. His defense did not break. Behind Maul, Kagan pushed himself up, pain flaring through his ribs. He did not shout. He did not rush. He waited for the moment Maul committed fully. It came. Kagan moved. Green light flashed, slicing across Maul's side. The Sith screamed and spun away, clutching the scorched wound. Red blade flaring wildly as he retreated. The energy gates slammed down again, separating them. This time, Maul staggered. His breathing was ragged. One arm hung lower than the other, muscles trembling beneath burned flesh. The rage was still there, but beneath it lurked something darker. Fear. Kagan leaned heavily on his staff-like hilt, chest rising and falling. Obi-Wan stepped beside him, shoulder to shoulder, their robes singed, faces marked by sweat and soot. "We can end this," Obi-Wan said quietly. "Yes," Kagan replied, "but not the way the Sith expect." High above Naboo, the space battle raged on. N-1 starfighters darted between Trade Federation control ships, laser fire painting the void in streaks of green and red. On the plains, Gungan shields flickered under relentless bombardment. And in Coruscant, Darth Sidious felt the disturbance sharpen. Maul was not winning. That alone was concerning. Back in the generator chamber, the gates cycled once more. Maul did not charge this time. He stood still, saber ignited, eyes locked on Kagan Jinn. "You should be dead," he hissed. Kagan met his gaze calmly. "So you were told." The gates dropped. Maul moved not at Obi-Wan, but straight for Kagan, pouring everything into a single, annihilating strike meant to shatter the bond once and for all. Obi-Wan stepped in without hesitation. The Force surged, and something inside Obi-Wan Kenobi shifted irreversibly. Obi-Wan did not think. He acted. The moment Darth Maul redirected his fury toward Kagan, something instinctive ignited within Obi-Wan, faster than doctrine, faster than fear. The blue blade snapped up, intercepting Maul's killing stroke inches from Qui-Gon's chest. The impact sent a violent tremor through Obi-Wan's arms, bones screaming under the force of the blow. But he held. Not because he was stronger, because he was no longer alone. Kagan moved immediately, pivoting inside Maul's guard, his green blade carving a tight arc that forced the Sith to disengage or lose an arm. Maul recoiled with a snarl, boots skidding across the floor as sparks sprayed between them. For the first time since the duel began, Maul retreated without the energy gates to save him. The chamber seemed to breathe. Obi-Wan felt it then, the Force flowing through him differently, not as a distant current to be obeyed, but as something present, responsive, alive. His fear for Kagan did not weaken him. It sharpened him, focused him. The contradiction rattled everything the Order had taught him. Maul circled now, wounded and furious, his movements more erratic. The Sith's usual predatory grace was giving way to brute persistence. He lashed out with Force-enhanced speed, blades flashing in a relentless pattern designed to overwhelm through sheer volume. Kagan absorbed the pressure calmly, redirecting strikes, conserving energy. Obi-Wan mirrored him, their footwork unconsciously aligning, forming a defensive spiral that denied Maul clean angles of attack. Every time the Sith pressed one, the other closed the gap. Maul screamed in frustration and hurled debris with a violent gesture, chunks of durasteel ripping free from the chamber walls. Obi-Wan raised his hand, catching the first midair and flinging it aside, while Kagan leapt through the second, cloak singeing as the metal smashed against the floor behind him. Maul used the distraction to close distance again, blades flashing toward Obi-Wan's exposed side. Kagan stepped in front of his apprentice. The red blade cut across Qui-Gon's ribs, burning deep. Pain tore through him, stealing his breath, But he did not fall. He locked eyes with Maul, calm, resolute, and held. No, Maul snarled, sensing the wrongness of it. The Jedi Master should have retreated, should have preserved himself. That was how fear worked. Kagan smiled faintly. Obi-Wan felt something break open inside him. He drove forward, force-enhanced speed, carrying him past Qui-Gon's shoulder, his blue blade striking in a precise, controlled flurry that forced Maul back step by step. Not wild, not desperate, confident. Maul barely deflected the last strike, stumbling as his injured side failed him. He leapt backward just as the energy gates roared to life again, crimson walls slamming down between them. This time, Maul did not pace. He stood still, breathing hard, chest heaving, blood sizzling where it touched the floor. His eyes burned, not with certainty, but with calculation. The Jedi were changing the duel itself, forcing him to react instead of dictate. That was unacceptable. Kagan sank to one knee as the adrenaline ebbed. One hand pressed his wound. Obi-Wan was at his side instantly. "Master." "I'm still here," Kagan said quietly. "So are you." Obi-Wan nodded, jaw tight. He could feel it now, his connection to the Force deeper than ever before, not because of loss, but because of presence. Because Kagan had chosen him. The gates dropped. Maul exploded forward, abandoning defense entirely. He unleashed a torrent of rage, blades whirling, Force energy crackling around him. Every strike meant to kill or be killed. The chamber echoed with the fury of it. Kagan rose despite the pain. Together, they met him. Their blades crossed Maul's staff simultaneously, locking it in place. For a heartbeat, the three stood frozen, green, blue, and red light colliding at the center of the chamber. Maul snarled, pouring power into the lock, muscles trembling. Kagan leaned close, voice calm even now. "You were trained to be alone." Maul's eyes flickered. Obi-Wan pushed. The lock broke. Maul was thrown backward, slamming into the far wall hard enough to crack stone. He dropped to one knee, breath ripping from his lungs, saber still ignited, but shaking in his grip. Somewhere in the galaxy, Darth Sidious felt a sharp, unwelcome certainty. This was no longer a test. This was a failure in the making, and the Sith did not forgive failure. Darth Maul rose slowly, one hand braced against the fractured wall, the other gripping his double-bladed saber like a lifeline. The chamber felt smaller now, the hum of the generators louder, as if the machinery itself sensed the imbalance. His breath came in harsh pulls, each one tasting of blood and ozone. Pain radiated from his wounded side, but worse than the pain was the truth pressing against his mind. This was not how it was meant to go. The Sith were hunters. Precision, control, isolation. He had been shaped into a weapon designed to shatter Jedi through fear and separation. Yet here stood two who refused to fracture, who drew strength from proximity, from loyalty. It was an affront to everything he had been taught. Kagan advanced first, measured and deliberate, green blade held low in a defensive guard rather than raised for a killing blow. Obi-Wan matched his pace, blue saber angled outward, watching for any sudden surge of speed or force assault. Maul snarled and hurled himself forward once more, but the desperation was obvious now. His strikes were wider, his timing less exact, rage bleeding into every movement. Obi-Wan absorbed the brunt of it, redirecting Maul's momentum, while Kagan targeted the Sith's injured flank with relentless precision. Maul tried to disengage, to regain distance, but the Jedi denied him. They pressed together, forcing him into a shrinking pocket of space, denying him the room he needed to turn aggression into dominance. Sparks sprayed as blades collided, the smell of scorched air thickening with every exchange. The energy gates slammed down again, this time behind Maul. He was trapped. For the first time, true panic flickered across his face. Maul roared and unleashed a violent force scream, a wave of raw dark side energy that tore through the chamber like a shockwave. Obi-Wan was flung backward, crashing hard into the floor. Kagan staggered, barely managing to keep his footing as the pain in his ribs flared anew. Maul lunged toward Obi-Wan, sensing weakness. "No," Kagan said, voice firm despite the agony. He stepped into the path of Maul's charge, igniting his blade anew as the Sith saber came down in a brutal overhead arc. Kagan caught it, muscles screaming, boots sliding across the floor. The impact sent a tremor through the chamber. Obi-Wan rose, summoning the Force, not in anger, but in resolve. He reached out, not to strike, but to unbalance. Maul's footing faltered for a fraction of a second. That was enough. Kagan twisted his blade, breaking the lock, while Obi-Wan struck low and hard. The blue saber sliced cleanly through Maul's weapon, severing one end of the double blade. The red plasma sputtered and died, leaving Maul staring in disbelief at the ruined hilt. The Sith screamed and lashed out with the Force, hurling both Jedi away. Kagan hit the floor hard, vision blurring, while Obi-Wan rolled to a stop near the edge of the chamber. The energy gates deactivated. Maul stood alone in the center, chest heaving, broken saber clutched uselessly in his hand. His eyes darted between the two Jedi, calculating, furious, afraid. "You don't understand," he spat. "The Sith will rise regardless. You are delaying the inevitable." Kagan pushed himself up, pain etched deep into his face, but his gaze steady. The future is always in motion. Obi-Wan joined him, standing at his master's side, blade steady, posture unyielding. Maul felt it then, the certainty slipping through his fingers. The duel was lost, not because he lacked power, but because the Jedi had denied him the one thing the Sith relied on most: isolation. He attacked one final time, a desperate rush fueled by rage and defiance. Master and apprentice met him together. Their blades flashed. Darth Maul fell. As the Sith's body hit the floor, the Force seemed to exhale a subtle release that rippled outward, unseen but profound. Far away, in the shadows of Coruscant, Darth Sidious stiffened, his plans shuddering as a critical piece snapped out of place. Kagan deactivated his saber and sagged slightly, breath unsteady. Obi-Wan caught him before he fell. "You stayed," Obi-Wan said quietly. Kagan smiled faintly. "So did you." Above them, Naboo's fate continued to unfold, but the galaxy had already changed. Silence settled over the generator chamber, broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the faint crackle of cooling plasma. Darth Maul's body lay motionless at the center of the floor, the red and black tattoos stark against the polished stone. The smell of scorched metal and burned flesh lingered, sharp and unmistakable. Kagan Jinn leaned heavily against Obi-Wan, every breath sending a lance of pain through his ribs. The wound Maul had carved burned fiercely, but it was not mortal. Not this time. The Force flowed around him, steady and grounding, as if acknowledging a path not taken. "He's gone," Obi-Wan said, voice low, almost disbelieving. "Yes," Kagan replied after a moment, "but not without consequence." Obi-Wan looked down at the fallen Sith, searching for certainty in the stillness. He felt it too, a subtle shift in the Force, like a stone dropped into a vast, unseen current. Something far beyond Naboo had been disturbed. The generator gates powered down fully, their crimson glow fading as the system returned to standby. The chamber's lighting softened, revealing scorch marks etched into the walls and deep gouges in the floor, silent testimony to how close the galaxy had come to a very different future. Kagan straightened slowly, drawing a careful breath. "We should report this to the Council." Obi-Wan hesitated. "They'll want answers." "About him." He nodded toward Maul. "About the Sith." "They deserve the truth," Kagan said. "But they will not like what it implies." Together, they made their way out of the chamber, footsteps echoing through the long corridors of Theed's subterranean complex. The sounds of battle above filtered down faintly, distant explosions, the rumble of vehicles, the chaos of a world fighting for its freedom. As they emerged into the daylight, the contrast was almost overwhelming. Naboo's sky was choked with smoke, starfighters screaming overhead, laser fire stitching patterns across the clouds. On the plains beyond the city, the Gungan shield flickered, holding, for now, against the relentless advance of the droid army. Captain Panika approached at a run, relief plain on his face when he saw them standing. "Master Jedi, are you injured?" "Nothing that will stop us," Kagan replied. "What's the situation?" The battle's still raging, Panika said. But the Viceroy is contained. If the droid control ship goes down, the ground forces will follow. Kagan nodded. Then we must ensure it does. As Panika moved to relay orders, Obi-Wan glanced back toward the generator complex, a lingering unease settling in his chest. Master. He wasn't lying, was he? About the Sith. Qui-Gon's expression grew distant. No. The Sith have returned. This one was merely the blade, not the hand that guided it. Far across the galaxy, in the deep shadows of Coruscant, Darth Sidious stood motionless before the viewport of his private chamber. The city's endless lights reflected off his pale eyes as he reached out through the Force. The connection he expected, his apprentice's fierce, seething presence, was gone, severed. For the first time in years, uncertainty crept into the Dark Lord's calculations. Darth Maul had been expendable, yes, but his death was premature. The Jedi were not meant to survive that encounter intact. Sidious's lips curled into a thin smile. Very well, he murmured. Adaptation is the way of the Sith. Back on Naboo, the tide of battle began to turn. News spread quickly through the ranks. The Jedi had prevailed. The Sith assassin was dead. Morale surged among the Naboo guards and their Gungan allies, hope flaring like a beacon amid the smoke and fire. Obi-Wan felt it ripple through the Force, countless lives steadying, fear giving way to resolve. He looked at Kagan, seeing not just his master, but the future that still lay open because he lived. We changed something today, Obi-Wan said quietly. Yes, Kagan replied. Now we must live with what follows. The galaxy moved on, unaware that a single choice, one moment of unity, had already begun to reshape its destiny. The aftermath unfolded faster than either Jedi expected. Within hours of Darth Maul's death, the droid control ship above Naboo fell to a coordinated assault, its destruction sending a cascading shutdown signal through the Trade Federation's ground forces. Across the plains, battle droids froze mid-step and collapsed lifelessly into the grass. Cheers rippled through the Gungan ranks. In Theed, Naboo security forces secured the palace with minimal resistance. Victory, at least on the surface, came swiftly, but the Force did not feel settled. Kagan stood on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens as dusk fell, the twin moons rising slowly over Naboo's rolling hills. The scent of burning ozone had faded, replaced by cool night air and the faint perfume of flowering trees. He leaned lightly on the stone railing, eyes closed, listening, not to celebration, but to the subtle currents beneath it. Obi-Wan approached quietly, carrying 2 cups of warm stem tea. He handed one to his master without speaking. They're calling us heroes, Obi-Wan said after a moment. The Queen's advisors, the guards, even the Gungans. Kagan accepted the cup but did not drink. Heroes are convenient, he said. They simplify things people would rather not examine too closely. Obi-Wan studied him. You're thinking about the council? Yes. Kagan finally opened his eyes. And about what comes next. The Jedi Council convened via a hollow projection before dawn. The familiar blue silhouettes shimmered into view. Yoda at the center, flanked by Mace Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Plo Koon, and the others. Their expressions were grave, their presence heavy with the weight of doctrine and tradition. You are certain the warrior was a Sith? Mace Windu asked, voice sharp. I am, Kagan replied evenly. He wielded the dark side with purpose and training. This was no rogue adept. Murmurs rippled through the council chamber. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium, Ki-Adi-Mundi said. If they have returned, it changes everything. Or reveals what we have chosen not to see, Kagan countered. Mace's gaze hardened. You faced this enemy and survived because you did not fall. That is unusual. Kagan did not flinch. I survived because I did not fight alone. The statement landed like a disturbance in still water. Obi-Wan felt the shift immediately, skepticism, curiosity, unease. The council was not accustomed to hearing unity framed as strength rather than risk. Yoda's ears twitched. Explain, you will. Kagan inclined his head. The Sith rely on isolation, fear, division. Darth Maul sought to separate us, master from apprentice. When he failed, his advantage collapsed. Mace folded his arms. Attachment clouds judgment. Detachment can blind it, Kagan replied calmly. Silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Yoda regarded Kagan for a long moment, ancient eyes thoughtful. Alive you are, he said at last. Because choice you made. Different choice. Yes, Kagan said. And because of that Anakin Skywalker lives as well. That name drew immediate attention. The boy from Tatooine. Mace said. You believe he is still significant. I believe he is the convergence of many paths, Kagan replied. And I believe denying him training will create the very danger we fear. The council recessed without a verdict. Outside the chamber, Obi-Wan exhaled slowly, tension bleeding from his shoulders. They didn't refuse. They didn't agree either, Kagan said. But the future rarely reveals itself all at once. On Coruscant, Darth Sidious felt the echo of the council's indecision, like a hairline fracture in stone. Kagan Jinn alive was a variable he had not accounted for, a Jedi who listened to the living force rather than the rigid architecture of the Order. That made him dangerous. Sidious began adjusting the grand plan, not abandoning it, but reshaping it. New apprentices could be found. New pressures applied. The Republic's decay was already too advanced to halt. But the path would be Messier. Back on Naboo, Obi-Wan stood beside Kagan as the sun rose, casting golden light across the palace grounds. You trusted me, Obi-Wan said quietly. In the duel. Completely. Kagan smiled. That is what it means to be a master. Obi-Wan nodded, something resolute settling into his core. He was not defined by loss. Not forged by grief. He was shaped by choice. And somewhere in the currents of the Force, countless futures began to diverge, none of them untouched by the fact that Kagan Jinn still walked the galaxy. The Jedi Temple had never felt so quiet. From the outside, Coruscant roared as it always did. Repulsor traffic screaming through layered skylanes, holographic billboards bathing the Durasteel towers in artificial color, trillions of lives colliding in endless motion. But within the temple's ancient stone walls, the silence carried weight. It pressed against the senses like a held breath, heavy with unspoken tension. Kagan Jinn felt at the moment he crossed the threshold. The temple guards inclined their heads as he and Obi-Wan passed, but their expressions lingered, curious, uncertain. News traveled quickly here, carried not by rumor, but by the Force itself. A Sith revealed. A Sith slain. A Jedi who should have died, walking calmly through the halls instead. Obi-Wan walked half a step behind his master, posture straight, eyes forward. Yet inside, his thoughts churned. The duel on Naboo replayed in fragments, Maul's rage, Kagan stepping between him and death, the Force surging through him in ways he had never known. He felt changed, but not unbalanced, sharpened, anchored. That, more than anything, unsettled him. They entered the council chamber together. The circular room glowed softly, daylight filtering in through the high windows that overlooked Coruscant's endless skyline. The council masters sat in their familiar arrangement, robes immaculate, expressions guarded. Yoda rested his hands on his Jimmer stick. Mace Windu stood rigid, arms folded within his sleeves. Plo Koon watched them intently, mask unreadable. Kagan inclined his head. Obi-Wan followed. Alive you are, Yoda said at last, breaking the silence. Unexpected this is. Yet here I stand, Kagan replied evenly. Mace Windu's gaze was sharp. We have reviewed your report. Your encounter with the Sith was unconventional. Kagan met his eyes without flinching. The Sith was unconventional. A ripple of discomfort passed through the chamber. You claim the Sith relied on separation as strategy, Ki-Adi-Mundi said. That unity undermined his advantage. Yes, Kagan said simply. And you believe this has implications for the Order, Mace pressed. I believe it already has, Kagan replied. We survived because we fought as more than doctrine, because we trusted the living Force rather than rigid expectation. Obi-Wan felt the Force shift subtly, like currents meeting resistance. Attachment is forbidden for a reason, Mace said coldly. The dark side exploits it. Attachment, Kagan countered calmly, is not the same as connection. Fear of loss leads to the dark side. But presence, trust, shared purpose, those are not chains. They are anchors. Yoda's ears twitched. Dangerous, this line of thinking is, Mace said. The Jedi way has preserved balance for 1,000 generations. And yet the Sith have returned, Kagan said quietly. The words struck like a blade. Silence followed, long, heavy, undeniable. Obi-Wan felt a flicker of something ripple through the Force beyond the chamber, faint but sharp. Far away, deep beneath the Senate district, Darth Sidious felt it too. Kagan Jinn was not just alive. He was challenging the foundations. Sidious stood in his private sanctuary, the city's glow stretching endlessly beyond the viewport. His hands were clasped behind his back, his expression serene, but his mind worked furiously, recalculating. Maul's death was acceptable. Regrettable, but acceptable. Qui-Gon's survival was not. The Jedi Master represented everything the Order feared and everything the Sith despised. A Jedi who listened, who adapted, who questioned. Worse still, he had proven that unity could counter Sith doctrine itself. Sidious felt the echo of Obi-Wan Kenobi as well, the apprentice who had grown not through loss, but through trust. That deviation alone threatened future designs. Interesting. Sidious turned away from the viewport and activated a holoprojector. A familiar blue figure shimmered into view. Count Dooku, still publicly known as a respected political idealist. His break with the Order not yet complete. Master, Dooku said quietly. The Jedi are changing, Sidious replied. And not in our favor. Dooku's brow furrowed. Kagan. Yes, Sidious said. He should have died on Naboo. Instead, he has planted doubt where certainty once reigned. Dooku's expression darkened, not with fear, but with something closer to regret. He was always different. Then he must be isolated, Sidious said smoothly. If not destroyed, then discredited. On Coruscant, unaware of the Dark Lord's machinations, Kagan and Obi-Wan exited the council chamber together. They're afraid, Obi-Wan said quietly once they were alone in the corridor. Yes, Kagan agreed. And fear makes even wise beings cling to what feels safe. Obi-Wan hesitated. Was it wrong? What we did? Kagan stopped and turned to face him. No. But it was disruptive. He rested a hand on Obi-Wan's shoulder, firm and grounding. And disruption invites response. As if summoned by the thought, a temple messenger approached, bowing respectfully. Master Kagan, the council requests your presence again, later today. There has been discussion. Kagan nodded. Thank you. The messenger departed. Obi-Wan frowned. That was fast. Yes, Kagan said softly. And that worries me. Hours later, the summons came, not to the council chamber, but to the High Council's inner sanctum. Fewer masters. Greater weight. Mace Windu spoke first. The council has reached a provisional decision, he said, regarding the boy Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan's breath caught. We will allow his training, Yoda said slowly, but not under ordinary conditions. Kagan felt the tension immediately. Explain. The boy's age, his attachments, and the prophecy surrounding him make this delicate, Mace said. The council believes he should be trained under collective supervision. Obi-Wan looked between them. You mean not by my master? That is correct, Mace said. The Force rippled. Qui-Gon's expression remained calm, but something hardened behind his eyes. You fear what I represent more than what the boy might become. We fear imbalance, Mace replied. And yet imbalance is already here, Kagan said quietly. You felt the Sith. You felt what happened on Naboo. Yoda studied him for a long moment. A choice you force us into, the small master said. Dangerous, refusing you is. Dangerous, allowing you is. Kagan inclined his head. The living Force rarely offers safety. Obi-Wan felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was not just about Anakin. It was about the future shape of the Order. Mace exhaled sharply. We will deliberate further. You are dismissed. As they left the sanctum, Obi-Wan finally spoke. They're trying to contain you. Yes, Kagan replied. and in doing so, they may fracture themselves. Outside, the sun dipped low over Coruscant's endless skyline, bathing the temple spires in gold and shadow. Somewhere in the city below, the Republic's rot continued unnoticed. Senators bargaining, corporations scheming, the grand plan unfolding in quiet corridors of power. And beneath it all, the Force shifted. Qui-Gon Jinn lived. Obi-Wan Kenobi was becoming something the Jedi had not anticipated. And Darth Sidious was already moving to ensure that unity, so dangerous to the Sith, would soon be tested to its breaking point. The sun had long vanished beneath Coruscant skyline, leaving the cityscape ablaze with the artificial brilliance of a million lights. The Force hummed differently in the night, subtle yet insistent, as if the city itself had noticed the shifts caused by Qui-Gon Jinn's survival. Even from the temple's heights, Obi-Wan could feel tension rippling outward, uncertainty, opportunity, and the faint, prickling shadow of the Sith's manipulations. Qui-Gon moved through the corridors with measured steps, cloak brushing the floor, lightsaber unlit but close at hand. Obi-Wan matched him stride for stride, the connection between master and apprentice unspoken yet unbreakable. Every sense Obi-Wan had was on edge, sharpened by the duel on Naboo, and now tuned to the subtle currents of the Force that Qui-Gon seemed to intuit effortlessly. Their destination was the Senate District. Qui-Gon had requested a discreet meeting with a small cadre of senators who had already expressed unease with the Trade Federation's belligerence. The Force had guided him here, subtle nudges leading him toward those whose motivations he sensed could be aligned toward the greater good, or at least toward a temporary balance. Obi-Wan noted how naturally Qui-Gon navigated these political undercurrents, a stark contrast to the rigid dogma of the Jedi Council, and felt a swelling mixture of admiration and unease. As they entered the chamber, senators debated fervently, unaware of the Jedi watching from the shadows. A holographic display of Naboo's conflict lit the room, showing both the aftermath and the continuing skirmishes. Qui-Gon's eyes scanned the room with sharp precision, identifying which individuals were swayed by fear, greed, or genuine concern for the Republic. Master Jedi, Senator Padme Amidala said as she approached, bowing respectfully. Her eyes reflected relief, tempered with the exhaustion of war. Your presence here is unexpected. Qui-Gon inclined his head. I am here because your Republic teeters on the edge of chaos. I have survived an encounter that should have ended differently. And in that survival, I have seen both the strengths and the weaknesses of those who wield power. Obi-Wan's gaze swept the room, noting the unease in the senators' expressions. They were accustomed to Jedi serving as mediators, not disruptors, and Qui-Gon's presence carried an authority that was uncomfortably personal, rather than abstract or hierarchical. Your report, Padme said cautiously. The Sith assassin, what does it mean for the Republic? Qui-Gon's green-bladed lightsaber hummed softly as he ignited it briefly, the glow illuminating his calm, resolute face. It means that the Sith have returned, not as myth or legend, but as living threat. And more importantly, it means that the order you trust implicitly is not prepared for what follows. They cling to structure and fear to preserve balance, but the galaxy has changed. Obi-Wan shifted slightly, the memory of the Naboo duel fresh in his mind. Maul had been a formidable opponent, but their unity had rendered him vulnerable. They had rewritten the script the Sith had expected. And now their survival, their presence together, would ripple across the galaxy in ways no one yet comprehended. Padme glanced at Obi-Wan, her expression flickering with recognition. Your apprentice survived as well? Yes, Qui-Gon replied softly. And he has grown, not through suffering, but through trust. We are stronger together than the Sith could have anticipated. The senators whispered among themselves, unease mingling with awe. Qui-Gon allowed the silence to hang, letting the weight of his presence press without explanation. Obi-Wan felt it too, a subtle, undeniable authority radiating from his master, a Force-sensitive awareness that bridged not only the physical and mystical, but the political and moral. Outside, in the shadows of Coruscant's upper levels, Darth Sidious observed through countless hidden sensors and surveillance channels. He had felt the force shift, the tremor of Qui-Gon's survival, the subtle augmentation in Obi-Wan's power and insight. Each Jedi's heartbeat, each decision, each subtle act of trust was a deviation from his design, a variable that had not been accounted for in the intricate web of his grand plan. Interesting, Sidious murmured, fingers tapping lightly on the holocron interface before him. Qui-Gon Jinn lives. Kenobi has evolved. The Jedi Council persists in its rigid dogma. Very well. Let us see how far this anomaly can bend the galaxy before it fractures. He paused, considering the wider implications. Maul's death had been inconvenient, but not catastrophic. Qui-Gon's survival, however, introduced something far more insidious: unpredictability. The Sith thrived on certainty, control, and fear. Qui-Gon's presence disrupted all three. Back in the Senate chamber, Qui-Gon guided the discussion toward the immediate threat: the remnants of the Trade Federation, the ongoing blockade of key star systems, and the subtle manipulations of the Sith still at work behind the scenes. Obi-Wan listened, noting how Qui-Gon's approach differed from what the Council might have prescribed. This was not the measured, bureaucratic mediation the Jedi typically offered. Instead, it was a strategic application of the Force as insight, persuasion, and subtle leverage. The Republic will falter if we continue to treat these crises as isolated incidents, Qui-Gon said. They are all connected. Power begets corruption, corruption invites war, and war opens the door to the dark side. We cannot wait for prophecy or council approval. We must act now. Obi-Wan felt the Force pulse around him, a hum of energy that seemed to extend outward, touching the senators, brushing the city, and reaching even into the upper echelons of the Jedi Order. The unity he felt with Qui-Gon was no longer just personal. It was a force-based resonance that affected those around them subtly, bending thought, perception, and decision-making. Padme frowned slightly. You are asking us to act without the Council sanction. Qui-Gon's gaze softened but remained firm. Not without reason. The galaxy will not wait for consensus. We have survived a test meant to kill us both. That survival is our message. The Sith's return is real. Inaction is no longer an option. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, news of Naboo's victory spread. The Trade Federation's forces were in retreat, droids disabled, control ships destroyed, and the Queen secure. Yet with every victory, shadows deepened. Jedi were noticing strange disturbances in the Force, subtle presences, whispers of manipulation, and strategic shifts that hinted at the looming hand of the Sith, even if the individual responsible was unknown. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan left the Senate chamber, their figures moving down the corridors with a sense of purpose. The Force around them felt alive, aware, and yet cautious, as if it had learned from Naboo that disruption could birth opportunity. Obi-Wan glanced at Qui-Gon. Do you think the Council will approve our actions? Qui-Gon did not answer immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes briefly, listening to the currents, reading the unspoken threads of the galaxy. Approval is irrelevant, he said finally. What matters is that we act correctly, that we act in accordance with the living Force. The future will judge our choices, not their permission. Obi-Wan nodded slowly. He understood now, in a way he had not before, the subtle difference between obedience and understanding, between ritual and instinct. Maul had been a test, yes, but more than that, he had been a catalyst, forcing both master and apprentice to confront what they truly believed about the Force, about trust, and about destiny. In the shadows of the city, Darth Sidious leaned closer to his holoprojector, a faint smile curling across his face. He considered Qui-Gon's unity with Obi-Wan not as a mere threat, but as a challenge, a problem to be solved. Every Sith scheme, he mused, relied on precision and control. When one variable acted outside expectations, the entire plan required adaptation. And adapt, he murmured, we shall. On Naboo, the aftermath of battle continued. Survivors tended to the wounded. Droids were dismantled or reprogrammed, and the planet slowly began to reclaim its natural rhythm. Yet beneath the surface, whispers of danger persisted. The knowledge that the Sith were no longer a myth, that the Jedi Order itself had fractures that could be exploited. Kagan knew that these subtle undercurrents would shape the next months, perhaps years, and that his survival was only the beginning of a far larger, far more dangerous game. Obi-Wan and Kagan returned to the Jedi Temple later that night. Qui-Gon's steps were measured, mindful of his injuries, yet his mind remained sharp, tracking disturbances in the Force that Obi-Wan would have struggled to perceive. Together, they moved like two halves of a single whole, attuned to one another, ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. As they entered their quarters, Kagan deactivated his lightsaber, placing it gently on the stand. Obi-Wan did the same, his thoughts still tangled with the day's events. They had defeated Darth Maul, survived the encounter that should have ended in tragedy, and begun reshaping the Force itself through unity. Yet neither could ignore the wider consequences: the Council's cautious approval, Sidious's silent observation, and the subtle shifts already appearing in the political and mystical landscape of the galaxy. Kagan sat, exhaling slowly. The next move is not ours alone, but we have ensured the game cannot proceed as it once did. Obi-Wan nodded. And the boy, Anakin? His training is still uncertain. Yes, Kagan said, but he is alive, and that alone changes everything. The future is no longer a path of inevitability. It is a web, complex, fragile, and full of opportunity. We will guide him, but only if we are prepared to face the consequences of every choice. Obi-Wan understood. He felt the weight of responsibility settle upon him like a tangible presence, one that was not fearsome, but precise, deliberate, and essential. This was the burden of the Jedi, who acted, not merely obeyed. And as night deepened over Coruscant, the shadows moved differently. The Sith were already plotting, the Republic remained vulnerable, and the Jedi Order, ever rigid, ever cautious, would soon feel the tremors of Qui-Gon Jinn's survival. Unity had won a battle, but the war of destiny, of the Force, and of the very soul of the galaxy, was only beginning. The galaxy felt different. Qui-Gon Jinn could sense it in the Force, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, like the tide changing before a storm. Coruscant thrummed with activity, each pulse of traffic, each spark of hollow projection, each distant hum of hyperdrive resonating through the city's spires. Yet beneath the surface, currents of power were moving in ways he had not anticipated. The duel on Naboo had been only the beginning. A ripple now spread outward, touching distant worlds, influencing hearts and minds, shifting plans that had seemed immutable. Obi-Wan Kenobi, walking beside him through the temple corridors, mirrored his master's tension. The memory of Darth Maul's relentless attack still lingered. The precision, the rage, the raw, untempered ferocity of the dark side. Yet more than fear, there was a profound lesson embedded in that encounter. Unity, trust, and mutual reliance were not weaknesses, but strengths capable of reshaping even the most dire confrontation. That realization had left Obi-Wan both exhilarated and deeply aware of the stakes. Reports arrived continuously. Systems once thought loyal to the Republic had begun questioning their allegiance. Information leaked that the Sith were no longer legends but active players, pulling strings through agents and proxies, veiled in shadows. Qui-Gon's survival had changed the calculus, not just in how the Jedi approached threats, but in how the Force itself interacted with the unfolding events. The energy that had flowed through him on Naboo now radiated outward, subtly altering the perception of those attuned to the Force. Darth Sidious, observing from his private sanctum on Coruscant, acknowledged the implications. His apprentice, Darth Maul, had been destroyed prematurely, and the Jedi who had opposed him, Kagan and Obi-Wan, had survived intact, their connection enhanced rather than fractured. Sidious's eyes narrowed, the contours of his face tightening as he considered the problem. The Sith thrived on order, precision, and fear. Unpredictability was their enemy. Qui-Gon's unorthodox approach had introduced uncertainty, and uncertainty was a variable Sidious would exploit, but not without caution. "The Jedi grow stronger," Sidious murmured, voice soft yet brimming with menace. "Yet stronger does not mean invincible. Their pride, their morality, their attachments, these will be tested." He reached out, tentatively probing the currents of the Force, seeking weaknesses, tracing threads of influence. If unity empowers them, then we shall fracture it. If trust is their anchor, then we shall make it a liability. Meanwhile, the Jedi Temple prepared for the next phase. Kagan convened with a select group of masters and apprentices to assess the situation, strategize, and anticipate the Sith's potential moves. Discussions were tense, philosophies clashing, but always anchored by Qui-Gon's insistence on pragmatism over dogma. He emphasized the necessity of understanding the living force, of perceiving currents and tendencies rather than relying solely on preordained rules. Obi-Wan observed quietly, absorbing lessons both tactical and philosophical. "You are changing the order," Gadamundi said at one point, his voice tight with unease. "Not all change is for the better. The Sith could exploit even the smallest divergence from our practices." "Change is inevitable," Kagan replied calmly, green eyes steady. "Resistance is natural, but stagnation leads to vulnerability. We cannot simply follow precedent. We must respond to reality." The apprentice, Obi-Wan, felt the weight of those words. He realized that what they faced was not simply a Sith assassin or a political blockade. It was an entire galaxy poised on the knife's edge between order and chaos, and their choices, both immediate and measured, would shape its trajectory. The night deepened over Coruscant. Kagan and Obi-Wan monitored communications from the field. Across multiple sectors, subtle disturbances indicated the Sith's continuing influence. Covert manipulations of trade agreements, minor insurrections in distant systems, and the unsettling behavior of individuals swayed by unseen forces. Every anomaly carried the unmistakable signature of a dark strategist, one who was patient, meticulous, and infinitely cruel. Kagan spoke softly to Obi-Wan. "The Sith are patient. They are not defeated because Maul fell. His death is a loss, yes, but not decisive. Sidious will adjust, recalibrate, and strike when least expected." Obi-Wan nodded, hand brushing the hilt of his lightsaber. "We can't wait for them to act. We have to be proactive." "Yes," Kagan said, "but proactive does not mean reckless. Understanding the Force, listening to it, this is our greatest advantage. We must use insight, not just strength, to guide our actions." Meanwhile, Sidious implemented his countermeasures. Using clandestine agents and influence across the Republic and Separatist-aligned factions, he orchestrated a series of subtle yet devastating manipulations. Orders were given to incite conflict in Outer Rim territories, whispers were planted in key senators' minds, and strategic resources were redirected under false pretenses. The goal was not immediate destruction, but erosion, destabilizing confidence, creating doubt within the Jedi, and pushing the Republic closer to desperation. Kagan Jinn perceived these ripples in the Force, even as the specifics remained obscured. He recognized the pattern. The manipulation was deliberate, layered, and complex, far beyond the capabilities of an ordinary opponent. Obi-Wan, attuned to his master's guidance, began mapping these currents, correlating disturbances, and predicting potential outcomes. Together, they formed a dynamic unit of insight and action, extending their influence subtly but effectively across the galaxy. In a secluded chamber, Kagan and Obi-Wan trained, refining techniques that merged their mastery of the Force with adaptive strategies. Blades clashed, but not as in duels of pure aggression. Each strike, each block, each parry carried lessons in anticipation, intuition, and the exploitation of energy flows. The room vibrated with energy, the Force itself seeming to respond to their unity, reinforcing coordination and heightening awareness. "You move too predictably," Kagan said, his green saber a blur as he demonstrated a counter. "A Sith thrives on expectation. You must anticipate without being anticipated." Obi-Wan adjusted his stance, feeling the subtle currents of the Force flowing through him. "I see it," he said. "Like a river, not just what flows on the surface, but beneath, around, and through the obstacles." "Exactly," Kagan said. "A Jedi's power lies not in domination, but in harmony with the Force. When Maul attacked, You and I were one with it, and that is why we prevailed. Even as they refined their abilities, the political arena shifted beneath them. The Jedi Council, uneasy with Qui-Gon's growing influence and deviation from traditional protocol, debated in hushed tones. Questions of authority, loyalty, and the prophecy of the Chosen One were weighed carefully. Qui-Gon's survival had altered expectations, not merely of his own capabilities, but of the broader trajectory of the galaxy and of the young Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan's mind returned repeatedly to the boy, imagining his potential, the danger he posed, and the guidance he would require. Qui-Gon, perceptive as ever, noticed the concern but did not respond immediately, allowing his apprentice to wrestle with his thoughts. Later he said, "Anakin's path will not be simple. The Jedi can prepare him, but they cannot dictate every choice. Balance comes from understanding, not control." Meanwhile, the shadow of Sidious grew ever larger. Through covert communication, he instructed agents to probe Qui-Gon's influence, test the limits of Jedi unity, and observe Obi-Wan's evolving capacity. The Sith strategy was a slow, insidious one, ensuring that every opportunity for disruption would be leveraged fully before a decisive strike was attempted. The night deepened. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan returned to the rooftop of the temple, gazing across Coruscant. The city below pulsed with life, ignorant of the war waged in unseen currents. The twin towers of the Senate loomed in the distance, a symbol of the Republic's strength and its fragility. "Master," Obi-Wan said softly, "do you think Sidious knows how much we have changed?" Qui-Gon's expression was somber, the green glow of his lightsaber reflecting in his eyes. "I believe he perceives it, yes. But perception is not comprehension. He sees the shifts, but cannot yet anticipate the unity that made us survive Naboo. That will come later, when the consequences are unavoidable." Obi-Wan absorbed this, feeling the weight of responsibility settle upon him. Every choice they made from this point forward would be magnified, every action observed, every misstep exploited. They were no longer merely surviving. They were shaping the battlefield before it even formed. As the hours passed, intelligence arrived of another Sith incursion, minor yet strategic, aimed at destabilizing supply lines in the Outer Rim. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan prepared immediately, consulting maps, resources, and tactical reports. Every movement had to be precise, every decision weighed against both immediate effect and long-term consequence. The Force pulsed in anticipation, a river running swift beneath calm waters. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, united and unbroken, prepared to meet it. They were the unexpected variable, the anomaly Sidious had not accounted for. And the galaxy, vast and unpredictable, would soon bear the weight of that truth. The Outer Rim had always been a testing ground, for Jedi, for the Republic, and for those who sought to exploit its distance from central authority. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi arrived at the remote system of Ryloth under the cover of pre-dawn, the twin suns just beginning to stretch their light across the planet's rugged landscape. Reports had indicated unusual activity. Separatist-affiliated mercenary groups had been striking supply depots, and intelligence hinted that dark side influence might be subtly guiding the attacks. Qui-Gon moved first, his steps deliberate, attuned to every whisper of the Force. Obi-Wan followed, replicating the disciplined harmony they had honed over the previous weeks. The two Jedi were no longer merely a master and apprentice. They were a single unit, a fusion of instinct, insight, and precise action. Even at a distance, they could anticipate each other's movements, a subtle choreography born from months of shared survival, shared victories, and shared peril. The landscape of Ryloth was merciless, craggy mountains, deep chasms, and the faint smell of sulfur that lingered from volcanic activity made the terrain itself a natural defense for the enemy. Yet Qui-Gon's perception was beyond the physical. He could feel currents in the Force, disturbances in the local populations, echoes of fear and malice interwoven. "Obi-Wan," he said, voice calm, "the enemy is expecting conventional engagement. We must move differently. Subtlety and perception will be our advantage." Obi-Wan nodded. "Agreed. And the Force, it feels heavier here. Darker." "Correct," Kagan replied. We are nearing a focal point of the dark side's energy. It is not yet a Sith in full power, but an extension of one, a proxy, a conduit, perhaps a test. We must tread carefully. Their descent into the mountains was nearly silent, the only sound the faint hiss of the wind through jagged cliffs. From a ridge above the enemy encampment, Kagan and Obi-Wan observed hundreds of mercenaries and automated defense systems, all configured with precision, yet betraying the influence of a guiding hand attuned to the dark side. Qui-Gon's eyes narrowed. This is not just opportunistic marauding. Someone powerful is orchestrating this with intent. Obi-Wan tightened his grip on his lightsaber. Then we must strike before they can consolidate. Kagan raised a hand, signaling patience. Observe first. Understand. The dark side relies on aggression and fear. They will reveal their weaknesses in anticipation of attack. Minutes stretched, the two Jedi blending into the rocky terrain, attuned to the rhythms of the Force. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadowed structures, a humanoid cloaked in black, yet not Sith in the traditional sense. Energy fluctuations were subtle but deliberate, and the presence of the dark hand was unmistakable. Qui-Gon's senses sharpened. A servant of the Sith, he whispered. Not Darth Maul, but a test nonetheless. Observe his patterns. The dark agent's patrols were methodical. Kagan and Obi-Wan watched as they coordinated the mercenaries, the Force subtly guiding their tactics. Qui-Gon's eyes flicked to his apprentice. We have learned to anticipate individually. Now we anticipate collectively. This is our advantage. In perfect synchrony, the two Jedi descended. Kagan moved first, a shadow among shadows, his blade a green streak of lethal precision. Obi-Wan followed, each movement complementing the other. Within seconds, the first patrols were incapacitated, knocked unconscious, not killed, a testament to the restraint and philosophy both had refined. The element of surprise was total. The mercenaries had not anticipated that two Jedi could operate as one, anticipating actions before they were physically initiated. As they pressed forward, Kagan sensed something subtle. The dark conduit was aware of them, his presence pulsing like a beacon in the Force. He knows we are here, Kagan murmured. Prepare yourself, Obi-Wan. This will escalate quickly. The confrontation was inevitable. From a hidden alcove, the dark agent emerged fully, lightsaber drawn, energy crackling faintly along the blade's edge. His movements were precise, but there was a rigidity to them, a reliance on fear and aggression that betrayed inexperience compared to the fluidity of the Jedi Masters before him. Kagan stepped forward first, green blade ignited, the hum resonating through the valley. Obi-Wan mirrored him, blue energy cutting through the early morning light. The Force surged around them, and the dark agent lunged. Their engagement was immediate, a ballet of blades and Force energy, every strike, parry, and maneuver calculated. Qui-Gon's style was unconventional, adaptive, and fluid. He anticipated not only the enemy's movements, but the subtle manipulations of the dark energy guiding him. Obi-Wan complemented him perfectly, the apprentice's moves precise and reactive, yet seamlessly integrated into the larger rhythm orchestrated by Kagan. Blows exchanged with the energy of a storm, every collision creating ripples in the Force itself. The dark agent's power was formidable, but he was confined by expectation and a linear understanding of conflict. Kagan and Obi-Wan, bonded by trust and unity, exploited those limitations. Within minutes, the dark conduit was disarmed, yet Kagan paused, respecting the Jedi principles even in this moment of domination. Why are you here? Kagan asked calmly, eyes meeting the agent's. Who sent you? The dark figure, restrained but unbroken, smirked faintly. The Sith watch everything. Darth Sidious has seen your survival, your unity, and he will correct it. You are anomalies, not threats. Qui-Gon's brow furrowed. Anomalies can change everything. That is why you are here, yes? To test us, to divide us. Yes, the agent admitted. And yet even you, both of you, are dangerous. Obi-Wan's expression hardened. Then we will finish what needs to be done. But it will be precise, controlled. No unnecessary destruction. Kagan inclined his head. Exactly. Remember what we learned on Naboo. Predictability is weakness. Unity is strength. Let that guide you now. The agent attempted a last desperate maneuver, relying on raw aggression and force-augmented strikes. Kagan and Obi-Wan responded in perfect unison, countering each blow, redirecting the energy, and using the Force not as a weapon, but as an extension of awareness. In the final exchange, the dark conduit's blade was knocked aside, and Qui-Gon's green lightsaber pressed against his chest, controlled, lethal if necessary, yet tempered by restraint. You can choose surrender, Kagan said softly, or you can continue your path of destruction. The agent hesitated, then, sensing the certainty in Kagan and Obi-Wan, relented. Bound, disarmed, and defeated, he became a living warning of Sidious's reach, and of the consequences of underestimating the unity of master and apprentice. As they exited the encampment, Kagan reflected on the subtle lessons of this encounter. Victory was not merely physical. It was philosophical, moral, and strategic. Obi-Wan had proven himself fully, not just as a warrior, but as a Jedi in harmony with the living Force. Together, they had reshaped the battlefield, undermined Sidious's influence in the Outer Rim, and demonstrated that unity, foresight, and restraint could counter even the manipulations of the Sith. News of their success would travel fast, through both official channels and the currents of the Force itself. Systems destabilized by Sith proxies would now have hope, and the Jedi Council would be forced to reconsider the impact of Qui-Gon Jinn's survival. Obi-Wan glanced at his master. Admiration mingled with determination. We've only begun to see what is possible. Kagan nodded. Yes. And with each choice, the Force will guide us, but it will also demand accountability. The galaxy is watching, and so is the darkness. What we do next will resonate far beyond this battle. As they departed Ryloth, the twin suns illuminating the horizon, the twin currents of hope and danger pulsed through the Force. The war was far from over. Sidious's shadow remained vast and calculating. Anakin's path awaited, unpredictable yet profoundly shaped by Qui-Gon's survival. The Jedi Order would have to adapt, or risk being swept aside by both the corruption of the Sith and the fragile chaos of a galaxy in flux. And above it all, one truth remained unshakable. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, united, had rewritten the rules of engagement, not just in combat, but in destiny itself. The stage was set for a confrontation that would define the future of the galaxy. Allies and enemies alike would measure every decision against the example of the Jedi, who defied expectation. The Force itself seemed to pulse in acknowledgement, a river flowing stronger, deeper, and more complex than ever before. The galaxy had changed. The aftermath of Ryloth was a turning point that reverberated across the galaxy. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi returned to the Jedi Temple not merely as survivors, but as a demonstration of the power of unity, trust, and insight. The Council could no longer view their partnership with cautious skepticism alone. It had become a model for adaptation, strategy, and harmony with the living Force. The victories against Darth Maul and his dark proxies proved that the Jedi could overcome threats without sacrificing principle. Yet the cost and complexity of their choices weighed heavily on both master and apprentice. In the shadows, Darth Sidious recalculated his strategy. No longer could he rely on isolation or predictability to manipulate events. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan represented an unforeseen variable, an unpredictable force that required patience, subtlety, and unprecedented cunning. The Sith's shadow remained vast, but the balance of the Force had shifted, however slightly, in favor of light, foresight, and collective understanding. Anakin Skywalker's path had also been altered. Qui-Gon's continued guidance, strengthened by his survival and the unity with Obi-Wan, provided a foundation for the boy's training that emphasized choice, responsibility, and awareness of the Force's flow. The prophecy, once a rigid premonition of destiny, became instead a living, adaptable narrative shaped by intention and action. Each step forward required mindfulness, yet carried the promise of a future that could diverge from tragedy. Throughout the Republic, whispers of hope emerged in the corridors of power. Systems destabilized by Sith manipulation found new leadership inspired by the example of decisive, principled action. Jedi across the galaxy began to reconsider doctrine, not abandoning it, but integrating experience, observation, and instinct into their practices. The Force itself seemed to respond, its currents more dynamic, more alive, as if acknowledging that those who acted with harmony, unity, and awareness could wield it in unprecedented ways. And yet, danger persisted. Sidious's reach remained infinite, his patience vast, his influence woven into politics, commerce, and conflict alike. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan had won battles, but the war of destiny was ongoing. Every choice carried consequence, every alliance risk, every intervention, opportunity, and peril intertwined. The galaxy was not yet safe. It would never be completely free of darkness, but it had become a place where light, insight, and unity could thrive alongside struggle. For Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, survival had been only the beginning. They had rewritten the rules of engagement, not merely in combat, but in destiny itself. The Jedi Order, the Republic, and the Force itself had all been irrevocably altered by their unity. Their actions would echo across time and space, influencing decisions, shaping futures, and redefining what it meant to serve the Force. The galaxy had changed, and in that change lay hope, peril, and the infinite potential of choice. The stage was set for the next chapter of galactic history. The Sith would continue their machinations, the Jedi would continue to adapt, and new heroes and villains would rise in response to this shifting equilibrium. But one truth was undeniable. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, together, had proven that unity, courage, and understanding could challenge fate itself, and in doing so, had ensured that the galaxy's future remained a story yet to be written.